Hello, and welcome to everyone to the fifth and final collaboration conversation, an initiative of the Knowing Doing Network, KDN, and coordinated by the Center for Universal Education here at the Brookings Institution. I am Mashood. I'm the impact manager here at CUE and support the center's ongoing monitoring, evaluation, and learning around its research and engagement. Our conversation today is on the theme of measuring and sustaining impact, lessons from collaborative research and action. And we have a very exciting lineup of speakers who will be joining us from different parts of the world and will help us do three things. One, we'll try and unpack the meaning of impact in collaborative research and action and what it looks like or may look like across contexts. Two, we will share lessons and insights on how this impact can be sustained. And three, we will discuss different approaches to evaluating and learning from progress towards long term impact. Before we dive into those conversations, I would like to briefly recap for our audience about what the Knowing Doing Network is and what we do. So the network is looking at some big ideas. At the core of it is having a globally interconnected community focused on transforming education systems such that all children and young people develop skills that they need to thrive in today's world. The network is imagined as a space which brings together diverse actors that are working on different parts of the puzzles across education systems. And we're trying to generate and also leverage the power of relationships, shared learning, and action towards larger collective impact. So, three big ideas around the KDN. One is around connecting people. The network links up various thematic education networks from people who are working on gender equality to early childhood education, networks that are working on family, school, and community engagement around the world, innovative pedagogy and teacher mindsets, and also scaling of education innovations. And these form a collective, larger, decentralized network of networks. The second big idea, which anchors the KDN, is collaboration and learning together. So members of the network, they take part in collaborative research, peer learning, hands-on workshops, share tools and resources that helps us have a larger collective impact together. And the third big idea around the network is shaping conversations globally. Through our research, events, and webinars, the network keeps a dialogue going on complex challenges that education systems face across the world. And by bringing in local voices, especially from underrepresented and marginalized communities, we help global actors understand the contextual challenges and solutions more deeply. So it's all about making sure that local realities help shape global change. I also wanted to take a moment to share why we are having this conversation today about measuring impact and why does that matter for a network like KDN and its the sustainability of its impact. So as a decentralized network, which KDN is, it is important to understand how we are contributing to system level outcomes. And just as importantly, we also want to understand whether the conditions that support that system level change, like trust and relationships within our network, how are they evolving and strengthening? So by evaluating our activities, we can see what's working, where do we need more support, and how do we stay aligned and engaged with the long-term goals of our network. And evaluating our work also provides evidence of change, which we share with our partners, the communities we work with, as well as funders. And this is towards a larger goal of driving meaningful long term impact, strengthening accountability, and building momentum, and ensuring that our work stays responsive, purpose driven, and resilient, which connects to the sustainability of impact of our work. So let's dive into a conversation on really unpacking what impact means when we talk about systems change. And what could be some of the ways in which we can evaluate not only the impacts of the collaborative research and action work that we are involved in at a systems level, but also understand what is changing at the level of our networks. So I would like to invite and welcome Charmaine Campbell Patton. Charmaine has been a thought partner for us here at the Center for Universal Education and the Knowing Doing Network. She is helping us think about learning and evaluation from our work. She is a director at Utilization Focused Evaluation, where for over more than 2 decades, she has supported a range of organizations that are working on social justice issues across different thematic areas, and has really kind of worked with organizations to embed evaluative thinking across the programming and operations. And she hails from Minnesota in the United States. So, very warm welcome to you, Shamin. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Michelle. Great to be with you.
So, Shabin, let's begin by taking a step back and really kind of unpack how the term impact is used in the social sector globally. What would you say are some dominant meanings attached to the term impact, and how has this emerged over the years?
Yeah, it's a word that you hear so much more in the last decade, I think, than we used to hear, and has been adopted in, finance sectors. When you think about systems investment, they want impact investment in the philanthropic sector and the nonprofit sector. Really, a lot of people are looking for what does this mean, impact? And it really emerged moving from just measuring whether or not something happened, like a project or program took place. It was done looking at activities or, immediate outputs of those activities, to a recognition that we want to know whether those activities actually had a meaningful influence on the communities or the people that they were done for, or sometimes to, ideally with. And so I do think this focus on impact came from a good place to really want to understand more deeply what was happening in the communities where investments or support was taking place. But I think there is a shadow side to the word. And two colleagues, Geraldine Coffey and John Kania, wrote a blog last year through their Collective Change initiative, where they unpacked 5 words that you hear a lot in the social sector. And impact was their first one. And they really talked about how the etymology of the word is very much focused on force, like putting a force on something. And that when I think about impact, I think about like a car crash. It's not necessarily a positive word in many ways, and it's kind of a top down, like I am having an impact on you, rather than thinking about how something can, emerge together, or how we can make a difference. I think ultimately, when we hear about impact, what we mean is how do we know whether what we're doing is making a positive difference in the lives of the people with whom we're working, in the communities where we're working. And so just saying impact, I think can sometimes, depending on what your positionality is, not necessarily be a positive interpretation. But I do think it came from a good place, and that we just need to really unpack what we mean and who is experiencing that, and what the power dynamics are in that context.
I think you raise an important point about like the need to critically reflect on the meanings that we associate with the term impact, and if impact does mean like a positive change or difference, is that meaning inclusive of the needs and the voices of the communities and the systems that this change is being aimed for? And in an ideal world, it would be great to have clarity on even before we start a project on what impact means, and definitely before we even think about measuring or sustaining impact. Um, for a network like the Knowing Doing Network, I mean, the long-term goal is to drive systems change, which we recognize is complex and dynamic. And what adds to the complexity for a network like ours is that we are trying to drive change not only across very diverse national, subnational, community level context, but also at a global level. What do you think about uh, how should we approach thinking about what change looks like in systems?
Yeah, again, system change is a word that we're starting to hear much more often than we used to, systems transformation, even. And there are a lot of really useful ways to be thinking about that. The one of the models that I like was put out in 2018, the Water for Systems Change framework that identifies 6 conditions of systems change. And it kind of takes that iceberg of there things at the top that we can see and measure pretty easily, policies, practices, resource flows. So just thinking about what can you see in the system? And as you said, what different levels? Where are there global policies? Where are there local policies? What is the interplay between them? And then you move down into relationships and power dynamics that are really critical, but a little bit harder to measure and in traditional ways, but that are really important to thinking about sustaining change or creating resilient systems going forward that are connected and that are interrupting the way that business is done as usual. And then, like the most deepest transformative change is around mental models, how we understand the world, and really being able to unpack what those are. And when we think about the education system, we are operating in very much kind of an industrialized kind of model that really kind of puts every student through the same process and expects them all to have the same outcomes versus something that's much more customized to different contexts and needs. And so thinking about what are the different elements of the education system currently, and how do those look maybe the same across different contexts and differently across contexts, and what are the leverage points that CUE and CUE's networks can interrupt or connect with, and then where are other potential partners, other organizations working within that system. And how are those coming together to, so that not everyone is going to touch every aspect of the system or be able to influence every aspect of the system, but being able to identify where different organizations' strengths and focus areas are and how to connect those and work across silos, I think is really important when we're thinking about systems change. And just uncovering what are the frameworks that you want to be using. There are some really, really powerful Indigenous frameworks. I've been working with Dr. Nicole Bowman. She has 7 Directions Healthy Journey framework that really uses the Lenape medicine wheel to think about systems. And so context matters and worldviews matter, and thinking about identifying a systems model that can really connect what you're doing across contexts will be important going forward.
Thanks for that, Thosh. I mean, and you mentioned frameworks, 6 conditions of systems changes, like a helpful framework to kind of think about like explicit, more visible conditions of systems change, but also more like the less visible, more implicit kind of conditions, which you alluded to, like the relational aspects and power and mental models. Another framework which is very widely used is a theory of change. And is used across different organizations working in social sector and beyond as well. And it's often used to articulate how we hope to achieve long-term impact, and also the way to kind of reach there, and also helps with like ongoing evaluation on like how we are progressing. But when it comes to systems change, very often change is non-linear and very emergent. How should we be thinking about using frameworks like a theory of change And what would your thoughts be around that?
Yeah, I think in certain ways, again, like these things emerged for a reason, and theory of change was a concept that was introduced about 30 years ago by Carol Weiss and others, she was working with to really encourage programs to actually articulate what the assumptions were behind why they were doing what they were doing, including research and evidence, that can support that. But what has emerged is that often programs have gotten so caught up on creating and evaluating their theories of change, they forget that they need to actually be paying attention to what's changing in the context and what's happening and adapt and innovate. So a theory of change can be a starting point, but it shouldn't then be a limiting factor to what's emerging. And then the other thing is that within a network, you may have organizations that have their own theories of change. So you have multiple theories of change operating, within a network that are ideally connected and, complementary. But rather than try to get then all of those members of a network to adopt one theory of change, we've started thinking about what could a theory of transformation look like that nests different theories of change together, again, across the systems, the different aspects of systems change to help really provide more of that cohesion around how the different theories of change are operating together and then how they're shifting and responding to ongoing emergent factors that might be coming up as the world changes.
Thanks, Charmin. Uh, Another thought, which as a network that is working to kind of drive systems change, a question is around like the cohesion of our networks, right? We kind of interested in understanding how are the nature of interactions and relationships emerging within the network. And For a network like the Knowing Doing network, it's very diverse, very decentralized. We have members in more than 70 countries. And our network members engage in not just the more formal spaces and convenings, but also more organically and informally. They connect with each other. But despite the diversity and decentralization, what unites all our network members and the various subnetworks that are part of the KDN is the long-term vision. Um, as a network that wants to understand how our relationships and network health are evolving, what would your thoughts be around what indicators can be helpful to think around network health and what strategies could be maybe used to track that?
Yeah. Well, indicators is another one of those words. We can unpack what that means and think about, trying not to be too static in what we're looking for, but having a emergent understanding of what does health mean in the contexts in which they're operating. And I think because you have such diverse networks that span so many different communities and contexts, really thinking with the members and with the networks of what would be meaningful to them and how can we embed those measures or indications or things that are emerging that might indicate that there's more trust and there are, more sustained relationships. How can we embed that in the work of the network so it's not like once a year you do a survey and they say whether or not they trust each other, but that there's some deeper ways to measure that, things that you're looking for that might be able to emerge. And one of the things that we've been trying with the KDN and that other networks have been doing is mapping the relationship. So we work with Christine Capra to develop a social systems map to be able to kind of get a baseline of what were the relationships that started and what were the different ways that people were connecting and how often and things like that, and then be able to return to that over time to see how things have changed within the relationships. And there are a lot of different indicators or things that you can start to look at within that that will help you see how the network is changing over time. But really, it's important then to connect with the network members about what that means to them. Is that making a difference ultimately in their work on the ground? Because again, as you said, we don't want to lose sight of this bigger picture of changing the experiences of young people, and that network health is kind of it's important in terms of sustaining that and building those relationships, but it ultimately has to have a connection to the communities and be making a difference in those communities. So balancing that is important as well, I think.
Yeah, and you alluded to trust, as a network we feel it's an important condition to kind of enable working together and eventually drive systems change. And the previous collaboration conversation webinar also talked about kind of how to kind of do that in practice. And but at the same time also kind of thinking about like how can we learn more about how trust is evolving in a meaningful way, it would also be important. One final question, Shamin, is about like discussing. I wanted to discuss like how do we understand the question of like attribution versus contribution of our work to systems change, and when change does happen, we are curious naturally to understand how it occurred and who was involved, and if it had something to do with the research and the action that we are involved in. And I think projects in controlled settings, they can use like experimental or quasi-experimental research and evaluation designs to answer some of these questions around attribution. Um, but it's very challenging in a systems change nat- kind of work, which the knowing doing network is involved in. So, any thoughts on how should we approach the question of attribution versus contribution in the kind of work that our network is doing, and any approaches that could be helpful for this?
Yeah, I mean, it's important not to try to capture attribution. It's not going to be possible, as you said. You're not going to select a group to get the research and another group to not and see because things are changing and you're really working in that complex system where attribution is not possible. But to explore the contribution of the network, I think there are lots of different ways that you can go about that. One way that I've seen be used is outcome harvesting, where you're really trying to understand what's changing and you kind of backtrack to understand what some of the things contributed to that change. And it provides a systematic way to look at what changes are happening and the connection between those changes, some of which will be, KDN, and there will be other things as well. And that shouldn't be seen as a bad thing that you weren't the only group that was participating in this, and the people in your network are part of other things and other networks as well, and that is natural, and I think that's important. Um, and really just thinking about, this idea of collective impact and what are the various ways that different groups are contributing is actually more powerful, I think, than trying to think about, well, let's put ourselves in a box and do our own thing and have our own impact that we can attribute, because that's not the way the world works. And that isn't, as you said, sustainable long term. What we want is to produce resilient systems, and to understand how that happens is going to take groups working together and trying to understand the different ways that they're contributing.
I mean, thank you very much for sharing some of these insights, and thank you for joining us and finding time for this. I think you've given our audience some great food for thought to critically reflect on the meanings that we associate with the term impact and what it means for our work. And you also shared some insights on some very helpful tools and frameworks that our audience can consider using or thinking about as they think about learning and evaluation about their work. So thank you once again, Charmaine. Appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Well, that was a great conversation with Charmin, and now I'm very excited to take the discussion forward and introduce a panel of members from the network, from the Knowing Doing Network. To take this discussion forward, we have the three panelists, three different regions of the world, including Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South Asia. Um, Even though our panelists are from three different parts of the world, but they share a strong commitment towards educational equity, and they have been working to create opportunities for young people to thrive all their life. They have very rich experience in working with very different system level actors in their context towards the long term goal of educational equity and opportunities for learning for all young people. So I would like to invite our panelists. Our first panelist is Maria Elena. She is currently the director of the Social Innovation Lab at Via Educación in Mexico, and she's associated with the Network on Education System Transformation, or NEST. And she specializes in monitoring, evaluation, and learning strategies and methods, and has rich experience working across different sectors. She's worked with nonprofit organizations, federal and local governments in the design and evaluation of programs, especially in Latin America. So, welcome, Maria Elena, and she's also been a thought partner to think about this webinar. So great to have you here, Maria Elena. Our second panelist is Shilpi, who is a research fellow at Dream a Dream in India, which is associated with two of our networks. One is the Network on Education System Transformation, or NEST, and the second is the Sparks Network, which works on teacher on pedagogy, innovative pedagogy, and teacher mindsets. Shilpi is an educational psychologist, and her interest areas includes social and emotional learning and the role of adult training in education. Shilpi, it's great to have you join the panel today.
Thank you.
And finally, our third panelist is Christine. Christine has been associated with the Center for Universal Education since 2016. She was an Echidna scholar back then, and continues to be engaged as a member of the Learning and Action Alliance for Girls agency, LAGA. She's been working in the education community in Uganda for more than 2 decades and has led several programs, especially on issues related to gender equity. Her research has looked at teacher policy and inclusive education as well. And she's been closely associated with the Ministry of Education and the Forum for African Women Educationalists, FAWE Uganda. Christine, wonderful to have you here, and who's joining us from Canada today.
Thank you, Masood.
So, very excited to have all three of you here. Thank you so much for joining. And I would like to begin by asking each one of you to introduce yourself and the context of your work or your organization's work and research with the Knowing Doing Network and the Center for Universal Education. And also, I would love for you to share how you're thinking about outcomes and impact of the work that you're associated with in our networks. So I would love if Maria Elena, if you would like to kick us off, followed by Shilpi and then Christine.
Great. Thank you, Marshall, for the invitation. So I'm María Elena, I'm from Mexico, and I work in Via Educación, which is a civil society organization, and as you mentioned, part of the KDN through NEST. Since its foundation, the mission of the organization has been to unlock the potential of individuals and society. And after nearly 20 years of implementing different educational programs with various allies from the private, the public sector, and also other organizations, we have been trying the last years to shift the focus, as many other organizations, from running small programs or different programs that had limited lifetime to start thinking about how to drive this systematic education transformation in our local context. We can continue having a lot of programs, but that's not all the time shifting the system. So to achieve this, we have started with a blank page, thinking again, looking the system with different eyes. We are researching the current state of the education system in a local state in Mexico, Nuevo León, and studying the ecosystem dynamics to identify which could be some key leverage points for systemic change. We are recognizing that transformation requires a lot of alignment among different stakeholders. So we're trying to create a multi-sectoral committee focus, at least for now, on youth, to start engaging this actor from public, private, and social sector. We see that if we don't start from that point, it's going to be very difficult. And for this, we have started to define like a core group with a collective purpose. It's something very important. It is, since the beginning, something collective that starts shifting the conversation from only criticizing the system. We know there are a lot of barriers and a lot of problems, to envisioning which is the education system we all want as a collective. And while we have very different perspectives coming from different sectors, we are seeing a lot of agreement in the ultimate goal. So we're focusing for now in one state, but we hope that this is going to model other conversation in different states and even for other committees.
Thank you, Maria Elena. Perhaps I'll take over from here and introduce a little bit about my work with Dream a Dream. So Dream a Dream is a non-for-profit organization in India that has been working in the field of youth education for the past 25 years. So there is a lot of experience that goes into where we have arrived in our journey as an organization. The organization's vision is to reimagine the purpose of education, the thriving of all young people, irrespective of their background. And the thing is that with KDN, we've been associated through two networks, like Mashood mentioned, Nest and Sparks, and both of our work with both of these networks sort of aligns with different aspects of the ecosystem that we're trying to explore as we reimagine this purpose of education to thriving, right? So, for example, with Sparks, the idea is to identify the potential gaps and links between the national education policy reforms, that is the 2020 NEP. So what are the links and gaps with that? Vis-a-vis the policy, practice, training ecosystem that exists within the country, which sort of influences the pedagogical approaches practiced within the classroom. And what are the influences on that? So this is more exploring those aspects and what we collectively call the invisible pedagogical mindsets. And we're trying to do that by not just, we're not focusing on one particular state, because India is a diverse context. So if we want to get an understanding of the pedagogical approaches and practices in different contexts, we have to understand the local ecosystem, and that is one of the components of IPMs as well. So interviewing teachers, understanding from them what could be some of these potential influences is what we are trying to do with Sparks. And this is complemented with the other aspect, which is the work with Nest, and where we are trying to understand the systemic barriers that might be impeding the young people from thriving. So what are those barriers is what we're trying to explore, and how well our education system actually creating those opportunities for the young people. To do that, it means we need to explore what the current policy is, how are these policies, what are those gaps in inclusion, equity, dignity, justice, how are those aspects part of the policy or maybe amiss in the current policy reforms? And most importantly, when we're talking about systemic barriers and what Sharmeen was also talking about, what are those mindsets that could be impeding this system to transform and move a little closer towards striving? So this is like a 35,000 feet broad picture of the work that we're trying to do with KDN, and sort of aligns to the work that we're also trying to do as an organization. So over to Christine.
Thank you. We are the Learning and Action Alliance for Girls Agency, that's LAGA. So this is a community of practice composed of 23 leaders from 15 countries across Africa, America, Asia, and the Middle East. And all of us are members of or alumni of the Echidna Global Scholar Program. And including the LAGA members, we also have members of the Brookings Center for Universal Education. So as a network, through collaborative action research, we focus on gender equality in and through education, and our most recent research focused on how adolescent girls understand and exercise agency in their lives. So we put together some girl-centered methodologies which we have used in these highly marginalized communities in Bangladesh, Jamaica, Nigeria, Pakistan, Vietnam, Zimbabwe, and also the Karamoja region, which is on the border of Kenya and Uganda. Through this, we explored social, cultural, and the policy environments that either enable or limit the girls' decision-making, mobility, and their self-determination. As LAGA, our end goal has really been around impact and how to understand improved opportunities for the well-being for girls in their communities and generally equal gender within the societies. Towards the end, our findings are really to forge effective alliances among actors committed to gender transformative education and adolescent agency in the local context and also globally. So for example, we have engaged the stakeholders so that they understand this conversation and are able to design action plans informed by this research. We are now in our second phase of our work, and we are looking at including the stakeholders, particularly the girls, to help us to design tools, practices, and policies that can center agency and drive meaningful change. So generally, we are looking at that cohesiveness between the various stakeholders coming together and really owning this project and being able to work closely with us. Over to you, Masud.
Thank you, Christine, Shilpi, Marielena. Really appreciate you kind of giving our audience an introduction about your context and the work you're doing with the networks. And I think one common thread which I observed across the three contexts and the work you were describing is that your work, your research, and the engagement that you're doing with different actors is addressing many systemic conditions which are related to relationships between actors, power dynamics, and mindsets in many different ways. So I heard talking about like building relationships by across different actors by convening and by making committees and collectives and alliances around and having a conversation around the evidence. And you're also addressing unequal power dynamics that may sometimes exist in systems by centering the voices of young people and girls in the research and the convenings. And also, you alluded to addressing mindsets of diverse actors. So, be it through, say, the Sparks research, which is investigating pedagogical mindsets among teachers and different actors, or Laga's work on girls' agency, and this research is really kind of being used to inform dialogue among different actors by bringing them together towards like a long-term vision of having like a cohesive vision towards systems change. And I appreciate that the meaning making around what the impact of the work is, uh, you're doing it in a way that is participatory with different actors in your context. And this brings me to my next question around the sustainability of the impact of the work that we are involved in. And a key principle in the research that is being conducted across the Knowing Doing network by different members is that the process is very participatory and collaborative. So my question is from an impact sustainability perspective, why is collaborative and participatory approach to research and action important? And here, if I could ask Shilpi to go first, followed by Christine and then Maria Elena.
Sure, thank you. So I think that's a question that we've been also reflecting on, right? So if I could just start with the example of Sparks, because you mentioned that. So in Sparks, one aspect is also to build what we call research policy collaboratives, so that there could be conversation around the insight, and that research could translate into actionable work, right? And when we say it's a collaborative. So it is a common space where the idea is to facilitate that space in a manner that researchers, policymakers, educators, stakeholders within the education system all collaborate on that common platform. And it's facilitative in the sense that while Dream a Dream may be anchoring some part of the research, it is important for us to be cognizant of that. How can we facilitate it in that process and not coming up as an outsider into this ecosystem, or as an academic superior, which sometimes often happens in partnerships or in research policy exchanges. So how to make that engagement collaborative is through this facilitative approach that we are trying to do when we are trying to bring these RPCs into picture, and think about and focus on pedagogical approaches and the influences of sociocultural factors, learning theories, local ecosystem on the classroom practices. Having said that, important aspect also is to understand that these RPCs or these research policy collaboratives do not happen in like at a national level, but they also they emerge from the local context, and that is why the idea is to have these to facilitate these exchanges at state level wherever we are having this process. So something that we've also been thinking about is that then what is the learning for us to make this a sustainable process, and how this collaborative research leads to sustained impact and sustainable impact. And we've realized is that from the procreation process to the meaning making process, it needs to be embedded. The collaborative process needs to be embedded from the very beginning of a collaborative process. And the question is, can policymakers, educators, researchers be all involved in the creation of these shared vision, be it the tool designing, process setting, the communication, the decision making, impact assessment, and how can that then lead to shared accountability for the actions that we are going to have? That is something that we are consciously focusing on as we facilitate these RPCs, and it remains an ongoing process for us. It remains an emerging process for us, and we hope that this continues to create that exchange. With that, I'll pass it on to Christine.
Thank you, Shilpi. And indeed, very similar findings with us. So in the context of the Uganda-Kenya LAGA research in particular, which I was part of the leads, we tried to use a very collaborative and participatory approach. And this mainly centered around engaging the girls as active contributors, not just as subjects. Most times we find that in researches, particularly when it's involving, let me put them as children, because they're 18 and below, we usually assume and we do not get them to come to the table and have discussions with us. So we had that opportunity to do that, and we ensured that the voices of the girls and their families were integral in the study. The local stakeholders definitely had to be involved, like the policymakers and the local leaders, to ensure that the research aligns with the culture and the social realities of the communities. Sometimes we go into these spaces and we are talking a different language, which does not resonate with the traditional realities of these communities. As a result, it will not be retained, and at the end, we shall have no sustainability. One other thing we did was to prioritize creating safe spaces for these girls, for us to be able to engage them and be able to hear really what they have. We made sure that we worked within the schools. For example, with this research, we were in very highly risky areas where there's continuous war and fighting. So the girls needed a space where, first and foremost, they felt free and safe, but also able to discuss openly with us. So we had a female teacher sit among us, somebody who they know and who they trusted, so that they could be more open to us. As a result, we were able to foster trust and even give them empowerment to feel that they could speak everything and anything to us during this research. The research methods were the community mapping, we did the interviews, we did the focused group discussions, but also we included one unique method, which is the use of traditional proverbs and riddles and sayings. So usually we may look at the normal research methodologies that are common, just as I've said, the interviews and focus, and they may not be so related to the culture and the tradition of the place, and may not give us exactly deep insight into what we are trying to search for. Agency is quite a special, I would say, area, because we are trying to look at how empowered these girls are, how are they taking control of their lives. So somehow we needed a way in which we could enter into their culture and traditional setup. So with the riddles and the proverbs, they were able to say things that empower them, and things that don't empower them are constantly with them in the community. So these methods helped us to capture a more comprehensive picture of their agency, acknowledging the intersect between gender, culture, and the socioeconomic factors. But involving their diverse voices throughout the process, I think, is very key, and the findings become more inclusive and actionable, promoting sustainable interventions that enhance the agency and overall well-being of girls in the region. So I'll hand over now to Maria.
Yes, so I'm seeing a lot of things in common. So just to recap a couple of them, a collaborative and participatory approach, we see it as essential, not only for impact, but for sustainability. So what we have been doing is hoping to create this multi-sectoral committee that has some governance structure and a clear action plan to transform the system. We know it's going to take time, but we have to start at some point. And while it involves this top-down vision and coordination, it must also integrate the bottom-up perspective. This means bringing together key and unbiased voices to work toward a shared purpose, ensuring that all actors speak the same language about the objectives, impacts, and know which are the roles. We saw this when trying to drive initial purpose. There were a lot of words that have different meanings for different people, like well-being, thrive, and even others like creativity and leadership. There are many types of leadership. Creativity can be for music, for inventing, for drawing. So there are different things that need to be incorporated. A key lesson we have learned is that the individual buying and collective ownership are critical, not to have this perceived as one organization initiative, in this case, VIA. So it has to have its own name, its own ownership. And for long-term sustainability, it must be moved beyond individuals that integrate these initial efforts to become embedded within the institutional capacities to ensure this continuity, even if the leadership changes. So we are working with the local Ministry of Education, but she's going to change at some point. So how we embed that into the ownership of the minister. And while we tend to see a lot of energy for these initiatives at the beginning, it usually starts to diffuse over time. So to sustain the momentum, we need to set some quick wins, like reducing the dropout in a specific municipality, along with some other long-term goals that turn the needle. So this shared language is very important. And thinking about how to sustain the effort is something we have to be thinking all the time. Thank you, Mashoud.
Thank you for these really insightful perspectives. And I think what I'm also hearing is that the process of research is at the very core of it is fostering ownership and like shared accountability, and trying to kind of like diffuse the as Shilpi mentioned, like trying to diffuse like the power dynamics between the external researcher versus like the insiders in the community, and why trust is, as Christine mentioned, trust is so central to be at the very core of the research and engagement process, and that puts the conditions for like long term kind of sustainability of the impact of our work. I'll quickly move to our last question. We're running a bit short on time, but I really wanted your perspectives on a measurement of outcomes and impact in research. And earlier in the discussion with Charmin as well, we talked about how some of the more less visible conditions of systems change, which is relationships, power dynamics, mindsets. Like these are somewhat more challenging to measure, and might be difficult to find indicators which are very specific or measurable or time bound for these kind of changes in systems. As you reflect on your work and you're with the Knowing Doing Network and the work you're doing, how do you think we should be approaching evaluation and learning from the outcomes of the work we are doing? So I'll invite everyone to share their thoughts in 2 minutes. So maybe Christine, would you like to go first, followed by Maria Elena, and then Shilpi?
Thank you, Mashoud. In the Laga research, we actually used a theory of change, which involved defining the goals, such as empowerment of girls, and identifying key outcomes like improved confidence or policy changes, and determining the activities required to achieve these outcomes. But what was so key in all this was it was important to understand what the girls were saying. I would like to talk about the fact that in some of our researches, we are looking at indicators like in the case of agency, where we want to find out whether the girls have gained agency. We look at things like, do they have a bank account? Do they have a cell phone? But does this really apply in the circumstance which you are talking about? These things may not be making any sense in the context. And so it's important to understand, what are the girls trying to say? What are the things they are trying to address within the gender-based violence or poverty, or the poor, or providing them a safe place? So these factors for girls are very important when we are looking at how we are evaluating our work. How do we get to start from the beginning and look at what our outcomes are, trying to determine what we are really going to be looking for, and then work forward. So other frameworks that we applied include outcome mapping and participatory evaluation. Here we are focusing on tracking behavioral changes in key stakeholders, particularly the girls. These frameworks, interestingly, have to be adopted over time to incorporate new behavior and pathways identified during implementation. So generally, the study has to keep on evolving, and you keep on tracking, and behavior changes in particular are quite hard to determine. Thank you, Masood. And over to Maria.
Thank you. So as organizations, we are usually used to have program level indicators that are complex, but are easier to map. So we usually track specific knowledge, practice, skills, attitudes, but going into deep into processes, interaction, mindsets is something very complex. So when we're thinking about the system transformation, it usually requires to measure deeper shifts. For example, in a mapping we did for Nuevo León, we found that sense of belonging at different levels of the system for teachers, students, is something very important. But then the question is how we measure that change. So we have to be very innovative. We usually have to think about quantitative and qualitative combinations, and that it requires something very dynamic and adaptive approach. And we use different tools like system mapping, causal trees, and theory change, that there are more like a living roadmaps to start thinking about it. So we have to distinguish some that are tangible or more easier to measure outcomes, and the intangible shifts such as trust, power dynamics. While the first ones, usually we use SMART indicators, we have to think about those that change the perception, social norms. And in this case, we can be very creative and use qualitative reflections or even a third-party evaluation, like a 360, to capture these changes in, for example, leadership mind changes. There is another example, for example, in a learning community program where we started collecting baseline and endline drawings and narrative from children, just to measure this change in perspectives on how they are learning in their classrooms. So that is giving us a lot of information, but we have to know how to code it and interpret to communicate.
Thank you, Maria Elena. So I'm hearing a lot of common themes and which overlap with similar to the kind of approach that we've also arrived at adopting when it comes to understanding what does impact look like, especially when we are talking about system transformation. Here, while Dream a Dream also has a theory of change, like I talked about earlier, right? So, and it is guided by that most important goal of ensuring that young people thrive. And for that, the education system needs to transform and the mindset needs to shift. There are some outcomes, and sure, there would be some outcomes that we will have with respect to who are these stakeholders who could contribute to the thriving of young people. What does that look like in the broad sense? But there are a few learnings also that we have along the way, which sort of have led us to where we are, right? So we've understood that impact is a journey, and we have to understand that this journey is unique for each individual or stakeholder within the education system, whether they are directly in the research process, collaborative research process or not, or the work that we are doing, right? So similarly, and in the same way, mindset shift could manifest in a varied manner for each one of them, be it the researcher, the policymaker, most important, the educators, or even the students for that matter, or the young people for that matter. So, and it could be unique in terms of the time that it takes to get there, and behaviorally, cognitively, how it manifests will be different. And when we understand that, we also understand that that means that the tools that we use, the standardized tools, are not going to be sufficient to capture some of these nuanced understanding of what changes are happening. That is why it is important that, and that's what we do, have those case studies or the stories of the young people themselves, or the educators, their journey of transformation as they undergo through different programs that may be part of the Dream a Dream process, to understand what that shift looks like, what that change looks like. And that's not always captured in through standardized tools, for that matter. Or even for us, for a school leader, how there might be some changes that they might manifest in how they take up accountability or ownership of some aspects of system transformation. That's interesting. The third part is that, therefore, impact evaluation, we see this as it's a progress, it's an upward spiral for systems to transform, where small progresses are sort of leading towards that larger change, and it is going to be an iterative process, and they're sort of part of that process altogether. So those are my key reflections on it, Mashood.
Thank you so much, Shilpi, Christine, and Marielena as well. I really appreciate like the insights and the lessons you have shared with the audience today. Again, you've given us and our audience some wonderful food for thought about thinking about impact evaluation and sustaining the impact of our work, and just kind of unpacking for us how we should be thinking about the term impact in general. Thank you for your time. Unfortunately, we're completely out of time, so I wanted to thank you once again, and to give the closing remarks, I would like to invite a CUE Senior Fellow and Deputy Director Jennifer O'Donoghue to kind of close up the webinar series here. Over to you, Jen. Thanks.
Thank you, Mashood, and thank you, Shilpi, Christine, Maria Elena, and Charmaine, for a really great conversation today. I was very busy here taking lots of notes from all the insights that came out of this discussion. I want to thank all of you for joining us today and for being part of this ongoing series of collaboration conversations, really trying to look at how we can leverage collaborative research, collaborative action to transform education systems. These conversations grow out of the work that we are doing at the Center for Universal Education, or CUE, alongside our global partners as we explore what it means to catalyze, participate in, and sustain collaboration for long-term systems transformation. And I think we heard a lot about that today, about the importance of this type of really participatory collaboration for sustainability. And to advance this vision, CUE, we've been working with our partners, as Mashood described, through the Knowing Doing Network, which is connecting education actors worldwide to foster mutual learning, drive collective action, and shape conversations globally and locally on education. I think that we are going to share a slide here where we invite you to learn more about the KDN, about the Knowing Doing Network. You can join our website, subscribe to the newsletter, or reach out to us directly by email. And just to close, to share that this 5-part collaboration conversation was started in November. The series has really sought to highlight some of the insights and initiatives that are growing out of the work of the Knowing Doing Network. We see them as part of and key to ongoing dialogue, research, and action. The discussions have really been driven by members of the KDN in 15 different countries across several continents, and have sought to address power dynamics, decision-making, inclusion and exclusion, the need to create new understandings and synergies between the local and the global, relational trust, and today this really rich conversation around impact. As I said, we want this to be an ongoing conversation, so we welcome your feedback on these past 5 conversations, as well as your suggestions about future conversations. What are the key questions that you have about collaborative research and action that we should continue to explore? Again, please reach out to us at knowingdoing@brookings.edu, and don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter and stay updated on the goings-on of the Knowing Doing Network. Thank you all, and have a great day, great evening, great night, wherever you may be, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.